I still remember the first day I stepped into Smith Enterprises as if it were yesterday. My name is Sophia. I'm 31, and at that moment, I was nothing more than a desperate woman clinging to a job I couldn't afford to lose. Rent was overdue. My mother's health bills were piling up, and I thought this position, personal assistant to one of the most feared CEOs in the country, would be my salvation. Instead, it became the battlefield where my heart, my fears, and my entire identity would be torn apart. From the very first morning, the hallways were filled with whispers. They looked at me like I was a lamb being led into a lion's den. I didn't understand then, but I would. Everyone in that building knew a secret about Henry Smith, that he hadn't touched a woman in 20 years. Not a handshake, not even an accidental brush of fingertips. And on my very first day, I broke that rule. It happened so fast. He needed a tie for a meeting. My arms were full of them when I walked into his office, overwhelmed by his presence, the cold, untouchable man whose stare could freeze anyone into silence. He looked at me with irritation, but when I saw him fumbling with the knot of his tie, something in me reacted. My mother always said I couldn't stand disorder, and she was right. Before I realized it, my hands were on his collar, straightening the fabric, brushing against his skin. The moment my fingers touched him, his body went rigid. He recoiled as if I had burned him. His eyes, dark, tortured, locked onto mine with something between fury and fear. My heart pounded, but not because of him, because of me, because I felt something too, something I couldn't explain. "Never do that again," he said, his voice breaking in a way that betrayed him. He wanted to sound commanding, but all I heard was desperation. And that single moment lit a spark neither of us could extinguish. I should have walked away. I should have stayed quiet, done my job, kept my distance. But his reaction pulled at me like a thread unraveling everything I thought I knew. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what wound was buried so deep inside him that even the softest touch sent him spiraling. The days that followed were a blur of confusion. He avoided me yet, called me into his office with excuses that made no sense. He pretended indifference, yet I caught his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking. Every brush of our hands passing papers, adjusting files, sent invisible shockwaves through the air. And behind his anger, I saw something he couldn't hide: fear. I had been afraid too for so long. Afraid of abandonment, of being invisible, of never mattering to anyone. My father had walked out when I was 12. My mother worked herself to exhaustion just to keep us fed. I grew up believing I had to earn every ounce of love I would ever receive. That kind of wound doesn't fade. It festers. It shapes you. It teaches you to cling too tightly to anyone who looks your way. And now here I was staring at a man who was equally broken, except his walls were higher, his silence deeper, his scars invisible, but brutal. The first time he asked me to hand him a report directly, I knew what he was doing. Testing himself. Testing me. The brush of our fingers was brief, almost imperceptible, but I felt it, the sharp pull of something neither of us could name. He didn't recoil that time. He stiffened, yes, but he didn't run. For Henry Smith, that was progress. And then there was the night of the charity gala. He asked me to be his date. His voice clipped as if it were a business order. But when he saw me in my black dress, his gaze faltered. Just for a second the mask slipped and I glimpsed the man beneath the armor. That man terrified me more than the CEO ever could, because he reminded me that even the coldest hearts could still bleed. What I didn't expect was her. Amelia, the woman from his past, the one who had shattered him so completely that he built a fortress of solitude around his life. I knew instantly by the way his body locked when she approached that she was the ghost he had been running from for 2 decades. And when she looked at me with that sly smile, I felt the weight of the war I had just stumbled into. Because this was never just about me. It was about the wound Amelia had left, the betrayal that had convinced Henry to fear love itself. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, I had become the woman who dared to break through the walls he had spent a lifetime building. That night ended with more questions than answers. His silence was a prison, and I could feel the chains tightening around both of us. But I also knew this wasn't over. Something had begun, something neither of us could deny, and I was terrified of where it would lead. The morning after the gala, I arrived at the office with my stomach in knots. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every glance, every silence, every unspoken word from the night before. Henry's mask had cracked, if only for a moment, and it left me shaken. Because once you glimpse the wound beneath the armor, you can never unsee it. He was already at his desk when I walked in, immaculate as always, but his eyes betrayed him. They were darker, heavier, haunted. He didn't look at me when he said, "Close the door." His voice was clipped, but the tremor underneath it gave him away. I did as he asked, my pulse quickening. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the papers on his desk, as if the ink itself could shield him. Finally, he said, "You saw her." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. His jaw clenched, the silence stretching between us like a rope pulled too tight. Then quietly he asked, "Do you know what she did to me?" I hesitated, then shook my head. I had my guesses. Betrayal, heartbreak, something so devastating, it had driven him into 20 years of exile from human touch. But hearing it from his lips was different. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling as though he couldn't bear to look at me. "She was my everything. My first love, my only love. I thought we were building a future together. Instead, she sold me out. She used me to climb, to steal, to destroy. I lost millions, yes, but worse, I lost faith in people, in women, in myself. She left me with nothing but suspicion and silence, and I promised myself never again." His voice cracked on those last two words, and it pierced me, because I knew that pain. Different details, same wound. My father walking out. My first boyfriend cheating when I was in college. The way life seemed to keep teaching me the same cruel lesson: love is a weapon, and if you dare to hold it, you will bleed. I wanted to tell him that I understood that betrayal scars you in places no one else can see. But the words caught in my throat, because the truth was I was terrified. Not just of his pain, but of my own. What if I wasn't strong enough to carry his wounds on top of mine? Days passed, and the office became a battlefield of silence. He avoided me, yet never stopped calling me into his office for tasks he could have easily delegated. I avoided his eyes, yet always felt them burning into me the moment I turned away. We were orbiting each other, pulled by a gravity neither of us could fight. Then came the board meeting. It was supposed to be routine, just another display of power and precision. But when Henry froze midway through a presentation, Amelia's name flashing on a document the lawyers had prepared, the entire room felt it. The CEO, the man everyone feared, stood speechless. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was madness, but I stepped forward. I translated his silence into action, redirected the conversation, answered the questions, steered the ship he had abandoned mid-course. When it was over, the board members left impressed, convinced Henry's assistant was the secret weapon behind his empire. When the doors closed, his eyes burned into me. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. "Because you couldn't!" I shot back before I could stop myself. My voice trembled, but I didn't care. "Because you let her haunt you, because you let her win." The room went silent. My words hung in the air like a blade. I thought he would explode, fire me, banish me from his world. But instead he just stared, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling against the edge of the table. For the first time, Henry Smith looked like a man on the verge of breaking. That night, he didn't send me home. He asked me to stay to sit with him in the dim light of his office, as the city glowed beyond the windows. He didn't touch me, didn't cross the line he had drawn 20 years ago, but he talked, for hours, about his past, his pain, his fear. And I listened, offering nothing but presence. It should have felt like progress, but deep down I knew what it really was: a door opening. A door I wasn't sure either of us was ready to walk through. Because love born from shared wounds isn't gentle. It's dangerous. It digs deeper, cuts sharper, demands more than either of us had left to give. And yet some part of me already knew we were headed straight for it. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched above fire. Every interaction with Henry was charged, every silence heavy with the weight of something unspoken. He was no longer just the distant CEO who barked orders and built walls of glass around his heart. He was a man unraveling, and in his unraveling he was pulling me down with him. One evening I found him alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. The city lights bled into the room, casting his shadow against the wall. His jacket was off, his tie undone, and his hands gripped the edge of the desk as though it were the only thing anchoring him. "You shouldn't still be here," I said quietly. "Neither should you," a voice whispered in my head. But I stayed anyway. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Do you know what happens when you let yourself need someone?" His tone was flat, but beneath it was a tremor that betrayed him. "They leave. Or worse, they stay just long enough to destroy you." My chest tightened. His words were a mirror of my own scars. My father's absence, the men who had promised love and delivered betrayal, the countless nights I had sworn I would never let myself be that vulnerable again. Yet here I was standing in front of a man who embodied every warning my life had ever screamed at me. "Not everyone leaves," I whispered, though my voice betrayed the doubt clawing at me. He finally looked up, his eyes dark and raw. "Prove it." The air between us thickened. My pulse raced, my breath shallow. I could have walked away. I could have pretended I didn't hear him, kept my heart locked behind its familiar walls. But instead I stepped closer. Not to touch him, God, I didn't dare, but to let him see that I wasn't afraid of his shadows. He broke first. His hand reached out, trembling, stopping inches from mine. He didn't touch me, but the gesture alone was enough to shatter the rule he had lived by for 20 years. His fingers hovered there, desperate, terrified, pleading. And then, as if the moment had burned him, he pulled away. "Go home," he muttered, his voice rough, his back turning toward me. I walked out, but my heart stayed behind. Because in that fleeting, almost touch, I had seen the truth Henry wasn't incapable of feeling. He was drowning in it. The storm grew louder when Amelia reappeared, not just at social events, but in the company itself. She came as an investor, her smile sharp, her voice dripping with false charm. To everyone else, she was poised, graceful, powerful. But I saw the way Henry's hands clenched under the table when she spoke, the way his jaw tightened, as though every word from her lips was acid on an old wound. And Amelia noticed me. Of course she did. She cornered me after a meeting, her perfume suffocating, her smile venomous. "You think you've done something remarkable, don't you?" she purred, getting close to him, making him depend on you. "But you're just a distraction. He will never let you in. He doesn't know how." I stared at her, my heart pounding, but I forced my voice steady. "Maybe he doesn't need someone to break him. Maybe he needs someone to stand with him while he learns to heal." Her smile faltered just for a second, and in that second I knew I had struck a nerve. But her words lingered long after she left, like poison seeping into cracks already fragile. Because what if she was right? What if I was only fooling myself, believing I could be the one to reach him, when 20 years of silence said otherwise? That night, Henry called me into his office again. He was restless, pacing, his hands clenched into fists. "She's trying to get inside the company again, to take what she couldn't keep 20 years ago. I can't let her." "But—" his voice broke. "I don't know if I can face her without losing myself all over again." I wanted to tell him he was stronger now that he wasn't alone. But the words that slipped out were different. "Then let me face her with you." He froze, staring at me as though I had offered him something more dangerous than any deal he'd ever made. His lips parted, but no words came. And in that silence, I felt it, the turning point, the moment when two broken people stood at the edge of something that could either save them or destroy them. The boardroom confrontation came sooner than either of us expected. Amelia arrived draped in silk and confidence, her eyes sweeping across the room like she owned it. The directors welcomed her with smiles too polished to be sincere, but their excitement was obvious. She had power, money, and history with Henry, history they thought could be rewritten. I sat beside him taking notes, though every nerve in my body was tuned to the tension between them. Henry's posture was rigid, his eyes fixed on the papers before him, but I could feel the storm inside him. The same storm I had glimpsed in those nights when he let his walls crack just enough for me to see the ruins behind them. Amelia spoke with ease, weaving promises of investment expansion legacy. But every word dripped with manipulation, the kind that had destroyed him once before. And when her gaze slid to me, a smirk tugging at her lips, I knew she was baiting him, daring him to falter in front of his empire. When Henry's voice finally rose, it was steady but sharp. "I built this company back from ashes, Amelia. I don't need your money and I don't need your name attached to it." The room stilled. The directors shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Amelia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed, a flash of venom breaking through her mask. "Henry," she purred, "you can pretend I don't matter, but we both know the truth. Without me, you'd still be hiding from the world. And without me, her eyes flicked to me like a blade would still be scrubbing floors somewhere." My chest constricted. The words were cruel, deliberate, and loud enough that no one could pretend not to hear. My pen slipped from my hand, clattering onto the table. I felt the weight of every stare pressing down on me, reminding me of who I had been, of the life I thought I had left behind. Henry's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. His voice cut through the silence, harsher than I had ever heard it. "Do not speak about her." The room froze. Amelia tilted her head, feigning innocence, but I could see the crack in her armor now. She hadn't expected him to defend me, not like this. "She has done more for me, for this company, than you ever did." He continued, his words trembling not with weakness but with fury. "She is not my distraction. She is my anchor." Gasps rippled around the table. My heart stopped. I wanted to look away, but his eyes locked onto mine, raw and unflinching, as though daring me to see the truth in his confession. For a moment, the room disappeared. It was just the two of us standing on the edge of something that terrified us both. But before I could breathe it in, Amelia laughed, a cold, sharp sound that shattered the fragile moment. "An anchor," she mocked. "Let's see how long she can hold you before she sinks you too." The meeting adjourned in chaos, directors whispering, some glaring at me, as if I had brought ruin into their pristine world. Henry stormed out, and I followed, my legs shaking, my mind spinning. In his office, he paced like a caged animal, his tie pulled loose, his breaths ragged. "I shouldn't have said that," he muttered. "Not like that, not in front of them." My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "You meant it, though, didn't you?" He stopped. His eyes met mine, vulnerable in a way that stripped him bare. "Yes." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the pounding of my heart. "I don't know how to love anymore," he confessed. "I don't know if I can give you what you deserve. All I know is that every time you walk into a room, I feel alive in a way I thought I had lost forever, and that terrifies me." My breath caught. Every wound I had carried, every fear of being invisible, every scar from the betrayals of my past, all of it surged inside me. And yet, standing there, I realized something: I wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one begging to be seen. I was being chosen. I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I reached out. He flinched instinctively, recoiling from the contact, but then slowly his hand rose to meet mine. Our fingers touched. His eyes closed, his body rigid, but he didn't pull away. It was just a touch, a simple brush of skin against skin. But in that moment, it felt like the breaking of chains that had bound him for 2 decades. And I knew then that this was only the beginning of our war. Not just against Amelia, not just against the world, but against the ghosts of our own broken hearts. The days after that touch felt like walking on cracked glass. Every moment was fragile, every word between us carrying the weight of a truth neither of us dared to say aloud. The staff noticed the change, the way Henry's gaze lingered on me too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. Whispers spread through the office like wildfire, and for the first time I wasn't invisible. I was a target. Amelia struck hard and fast. She began sowing rumors among the board, whispering that I was manipulating Henry, that I had clawed my way into his life for money and power. She painted me as a gold digger, an opportunist, a woman who preyed on his weakness. And the worst part, some believed her. After all, what could a woman like me possibly mean to a man like him? One evening, Henry called me into his office. His face was pale, his shoulders heavy, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. On his desk lay a folder, pictures of me, leaving my apartment, grocery shopping, holding my mother's arm as we walked to the doctor. Amelia had hired someone to follow me to dissect my life piece by piece. "She won't stop," Henry said, his voice raw. "She'll do whatever it takes to destroy you." And I... He broke off, turning away, shame flickering across his features. "I don't know if I can protect you from her." My heart clenched, but anger surged hotter. "I don't need you to protect me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've lived my whole life fighting to be seen, to be respected, to survive. If Amelia thinks she can shame me back into the shadows, she's wrong. I won't let her win, not again, not this time." Henry turned back to me, then his eyes glistening with something I hadn't seen before: pride. "You're stronger than I am," he whispered. "No," I replied, stepping closer. "I'm just not afraid to bleed anymore." The war came to its climax at the next board meeting. Amelia unveiled her so-called evidence, painting me as a liar, a manipulator, a woman who had seduced Henry for personal gain. She expected him to crumble, to deny me, to cast me aside to save his reputation. But he didn't. Henry rose to his feet, his voice ringing with a conviction that silenced the room. "For 20 years I let betrayal define me. I shut out the world, buried myself in walls of steel and silence. But this woman," he turned to me, his gaze unflinching, "reminded me what it means to live, to trust, to love. If you think that makes me weak, then so be it. But I would rather stand with her and risk everything than spend another day imprisoned by my past." The room erupted, shocked gasps, furious whispers, some even applauding. Amelia's mask cracked at last, fury flashing across her face as she realized she had lost. After the meeting, Henry found me in the corridor, his hands trembling as he reached for mine. And this time he didn't stop. His fingers closed around mine fully, firmly, as though claiming me not just before the board, but before the world. "I can't promise I'll know how to do this," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can promise I'll never let you fight alone again." Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." For the first time in 20 years, Henry allowed himself to be touched. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be loved without fear of being abandoned. The road ahead wasn't simple. The scars of betrayal don't vanish overnight. But together, we chose not to let those scars define us anymore. Because I learned something standing beside Henry: revenge isn't always about destroying those who hurt you. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is building a life they can never poison, a love they can never take away, and a truth they can never bury. So if you're listening to my story and carrying wounds of your own, remember this: you are not the sum of what they did to you. You are the proof that even the deepest scars can become the foundation of something stronger. And if my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave me a comment about the battles you've survived, because your voice deserves to be heard too.